The first time I saw Ria, she was sitting alone in the back corner of our literature class, her dark hair falling like a curtain across her face. There's something about the way she held herself so still, so contained, that made me think of a wild animal that had learned to hide its wounds. While other students chatted and laughed, she remained an island of silence, her fingers tracing absent patterns on her desk. I was 20 then, considered by most to be the kind of person who collected strays, both human and otherwise. My friends often teased me about my tendency to befriend the outcasts, but there was something different about Ria. She wasn't just quiet or shy. She was guarded in a way that spoke of deeper pain. When she did speak, which was rare, her words carried an edge that could cut glass. The other students had labeled her rude, cold, unapproachable, but I saw something else entirely. It was in the way her hands would tremble slightly when she thought no one was looking, the way she would flinch almost imperceptibly when someone raised their voice, the way she would stare out the window during classes, her eyes holding a depth of sorrow that seemed far too heavy for someone our age. I found myself watching her, wondering what had carved such careful distance between her and the world. The rumors about her were plentiful and unkind. Students whispered that she was arrogant, that she thought herself better than everyone else. They said she was mean, that she had no heart. But I had spent my life studying people, watching the way they moved through the world, and I knew the difference between cruelty and self-preservation. Ria wasn't mean, she was terrified. I began to notice the small things. How she would arrive to class just as the bell rang, never early enough to engage in casual conversation. How she would pack her things with mechanical precision the moment the teacher dismissed us. How she would take the longest route to her next class, always avoiding the crowded hallways where students gathered to socialize. She moved through her school like a ghost, present but not really there, existing in the spaces between other people's lives. There was one afternoon when I was walking past the art room after hours and I glimpsed her through the window. She was standing before an easel, a paintbrush in her hand, and for the first time since I'd known her, her face was unguarded. There was something beautiful and terrible in her expression, a vulnerability that she kept locked away during the day. I stood there for several minutes, watching her work, seeing the way she lost herself in the colors and strokes. It was like watching someone breathe for the first time. That was when I knew I had to reach her. My first attempts to connect with Ria were met with exactly the kind of reception I expected. She would look at me with those dark, wary eyes, her expression carefully blank, and simply walk away. I tried sitting near her in the cafeteria, only to watch her gather her untouched food and move to another table. I tried offering to be her partner for group projects, only to be told in clipped, polite words that she preferred to work alone. But I had been raised by parents who taught me that kindness was not a weakness, and persistence in the face of someone's pain was not intrusion, it was love. So I continued to try, day after day, offering small gestures of connection, a smile when she walked into class, a casual comment about the weather, an offer to share my notes when she missed a day of school. The other students began to notice my efforts, and their reactions ranged from amusement to bewilderment. My closest friend, Sarah, pulled me aside one afternoon and asked me why I was wasting my time on someone who clearly didn't want friends. I tried to explain that sometimes the people who push hardest against connection are the ones who need it most, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Even I began to question myself during those long weeks, when Ria's walls seemed impenetrable. It was during one of our literature discussions about trauma in modern fiction that I saw the first real crack in her armor. Our professor had assigned us to read a novel about a young woman recovering from childhood abuse. And while most students discuss the literary techniques and themes with academic detachment, I noticed Ria's hands gripping her desk so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her breathing had become shallow, and there was a distant look in her eyes that I recognized from my own moments of painful memory. After class, I followed her to the parking lot, keeping my distance, but making sure she was all right. She sat in an old car for nearly 20 minutes, her head pressed against the steering wheel, and I could see her shoulders shaking. I wanted to approach her, to offer comfort, but I knew that would only drive her further away. Instead, I waited until she composed herself and drove away, then made a mental note to be especially gentle with her in the coming days. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later, when I found her crying in the bathroom after another student had made a cruel comment about her appearance. She had been trying to muffle her sobs, but the sound echoed off the tile walls, and when she saw me, her face immediately transformed back into that careful mask of indifference. I didn't say anything at first. I simply stood there, letting her know that I had seen her pain, and that I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. When she moved to leave, I finally spoke, telling her that I knew she was suffering, that I could see through the walls she had built, and that I was there if she ever needed someone to listen. She turned on me then with a fury that I hadn't expected, her voice sharp and cutting as she told me to mind my own business, that I knew nothing about her or her life. But even as she spoke, I could see the tears she was trying to hold back, and I knew that her anger was just another form of armor. As she stormed out of the bathroom, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about reaching out to someone who seemed lonely anymore. This was about something deeper, something that I couldn't quite name, but that felt essential to who I was becoming. The pattern that developed between us over the following weeks was like a carefully choreographed dance. I would extend an invitation to connection, and she would push me away. I would offer kindness, and she would respond with coldness. But I began to notice that her retreats were becoming less absolute, her walls slightly less impenetrable. There was the day she missed a week of school, and I found myself genuinely worried about her well-being. When she returned, I approached her with what I hoped was casual concern, asking if she was feeling better. For just a moment, her expression softened, and I saw a surprise flicker across her features, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone had noticed her absence, much less cared about it. She recovered quickly, rebuilding her defenses, but I had seen that moment of vulnerability, and it gave me hope. I began to pay closer attention to the details of her life, not in an intrusive way, but with the careful observation of someone who genuinely cared. I noticed that she never ate lunch, that she always wore the same few outfits, that she seemed to have no friends or family who picked her up from school. I noticed that she was incredibly intelligent, offering insights during class discussions that were thoughtful and perceptive, even when she spoke in that careful, measured way of hers. Most importantly, I noticed that beneath all that protective ice, there's a person of extraordinary depth and sensitivity. The way she would pause when reading poetry aloud, the way she would tilt her head when listening to music, the way her eyes would soften when she thought no one was watching. All of these small moments painted a picture of someone who felt everything deeply, but had learned to hide those feelings away. I started leaving small tokens of friendship in places where she would find them. A flower pressed between the pages of a book she had borrowed. A note of encouragement slipped into her locker. A cup of hot chocolate waiting on her desk on a particularly cold morning. I never signed these gifts, never claimed credit for them, but I could see the way they affected her. She would look around the room with something like wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone cared enough to think of her. The turning point came when I decided to share something personal with her, even though she had never asked. I began talking about my own struggles with anxiety, about the way I sometimes felt overwhelmed by the pain I saw in the world, about my deep-seated need to help others heal. I didn't look at her while I spoke, didn't make it about her or her situation, but I could feel her attention sharpen, her careful distance wavering. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, she asked me why I cared so much about other people's pain. I told her that I thought maybe we were all just trying to find our way home to ourselves, and sometimes we needed someone to light the path. She didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. For the first time since I'd known her, she stayed in the same space with me without building walls or creating distance. It was the smallest of victories, but it felt monumental. Everything changed the morning I found her asleep at her desk. Tears dried on her cheeks. Her body curled in on itself like a child seeking comfort. The sight of her like that, so vulnerable, so completely unguarded, hit me like a physical blow. I stood frozen for several minutes, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, seeing the way her face looked younger and more peaceful in sleep. When she woke, the transformation was immediate and heartbreaking. The walls slammed back into place, her expression hardening into that familiar mask of indifference. She gathered her things with sharp, efficient movements and left without a word. But I could see the embarrassment and shame in the set of her shoulders. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had witnessed. The tears, the exhaustion, the way she had seemed to be running from something even in sleep. I began to see her isolation not as a choice but as a survival mechanism, and that realization changed everything about how I approached her. I stopped trying to break down her walls and instead began to simply exist alongside them. I would sit near her without expecting conversation. I would offer help without expecting gratitude. I would share my own thoughts and feelings without expecting reciprocation. Slowly, gradually, I began to see tiny cracks in her armor. The first time she voluntarily spoke to me was when I mentioned that I lived near her neighborhood. I had been talking about a new bakery that had opened nearby, and she looked up with something like interest. When I mentioned the street name, she stiffened slightly, and I could see her calculating something behind her eyes. I made a split-second decision to lie, telling her I had a friend who lived in that area and that I passed through often. I could see her processing this information, weighing it against her need for privacy. But for the first time, she didn't immediately shut down the conversation. Instead, she asked me about the bakery, about the neighborhood, about the kinds of people who lived there. Her questions were careful, guarded, but they were questions nonetheless. That night, I found myself driving through her neighborhood, trying to understand what her life might be like outside of school. The houses were modest but well-maintained, the streets quiet and tree-lined. I wondered what she did with her evenings, whether she had anyone to talk to, whether she ever felt the kind of crushing loneliness that seemed to follow her like a shadow. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed seeing her walking alone down the sidewalk, her shoulders hunched against the evening chill. Something about the way she moved, with such careful purpose, such practiced isolation, made my chest tighten with emotion. I followed at a distance, not to spy but to make sure she was safe, and watched as she disappeared into a small house that looked dark and empty. The image of her going home to that darkness stayed with me for days. I found myself thinking about what it would be like to have no one waiting for you, no one to share your day with, no one to notice if you didn't come home. The thought was so painful that I knew I had to do something. I spent an entire weekend baking cookies, trying to perfect a recipe that my grandmother had taught me years ago. The kitchen filled with the warm scents of vanilla and cinnamon, and I found myself thinking about Rhea the entire time, wondering what she would think of them, whether she would see them as an intrusion or as the gesture of caring I intended. When I knocked on her door that Saturday morning, my heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I had rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain my presence there. But when she opened the door, all my careful words disappeared. She looked so young standing there in her doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, neither of us spoke, and I could see her mind working, trying to understand how I'd found her what I wanted, whether this was some kind of threat to her carefully maintained privacy. When she asked how I had found her house, I stumbled through my prepared lie about visiting a friend in the neighborhood, but I could see in her eyes that she didn't quite believe me, that she was adding this to her mental catalog of reasons not to trust. The hurt and disappointment in her expression made me realize that I had miscalculated, that my gesture of kindness had felt like a violation of her boundaries. She closed the door in my face, but instead of feeling rejected, I felt a deep sadness for both of us. I had wanted so badly to reach her that I had overstepped, and now I had probably lost whatever small progress we had made. I went home and cried, not for myself, but for her, for the fear I had seen in her eyes, for the way she had to protect herself from even the simplest acts of kindness. I wondered if I'd been wrong all along, if my need to help her was more about my own issues than about what she actually needed. But I couldn't give up. Something inside me, some deep knowing that I couldn't explain, told me that she was worth the risk, that the connection I felt to her was real and important. So I decided to try one more time. When I knocked on her door the following weekend, I was prepared for her to refuse to see me. Instead, she opened the door and immediately began to apologize, her words tumbling over each other in a way that was completely unlike her usual careful speech. She invited me in, and I could see that she had been crying, that something had shifted inside her during the week since I'd last seen her. Her house was small but beautiful, filled with paintings that took my breath away. They were everywhere, on the walls, propped against furniture, stacked in corners. Each one was a window into a soul that felt everything deeply, that saw beauty and pain with equal clarity. I found myself staring at a portrait of an elderly woman with kind eyes, and Rhea noticed my attention. That was when she began to tell me about Mrs. Green, the woman who had saved her life. As she spoke, I could see the love and grief in her expression, the way she held that memory like something precious and fragile. She told me about learning to paint, about having someone who cared whether she lived or died, about losing the only person who had ever made her feel safe. I offered her the cookies I brought, and when she tasted them, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. The first truly unguarded expression I had ever seen from her. She ate them with an enthusiasm that was almost childlike, and I found myself laughing with delight at her enjoyment. That was when she asked me the question that would change everything between us. Why I was always so cold to everyone, why I pushed people away. I could see the moment when she realized she had made a mistake in her wording, that she had asked me the question she meant to ask herself. But instead of retreating, she seemed to make a decision. What followed was the most difficult and beautiful conversation of my life. Rhea began to tell me her story, haltingly at first, then with increasing urgency, as if she was afraid that if she stopped talking, she would lose the courage to continue. She told me about her father, about things that no child should ever have to endure. She told me about her mother's death, about the crushing loneliness of having no one to protect her. She told me about the night when she was 12 years old and her world changed forever, when she made a choice that saved her life but shattered her innocence. As she spoke, I felt my heart breaking and remaking itself simultaneously. The courage it must have taken for her to survive, the strength she had shown in the face of unimaginable trauma, the way she had continued to function despite carrying such pain. It was breathtaking and heartbreaking at the same time. She told me about the family that had taken her in, about the betrayal she had experienced when the man she thought would protect her instead tried to hurt her. She told me about living on the streets, about the desperation and fear that had driven her to attempt suicide at 14. She told me about Mrs. Green, the elderly woman who had seen her potential and loved her unconditionally. But it was when she talked about losing Mrs. Green that she completely broke down. The grief poured out of her like water from a broken dam. Raw, painful, and completely overwhelming. She collapsed into my arms, and I held her while she sobbed, feeling the weight of all the tears she had never been able to shed. I had never held someone while they fell apart before, and I was surprised by how natural it felt. How right it seemed to be the person who caught her when she couldn't hold herself together anymore. Her pain became my pain. Her grief became my grief. And I found myself crying with her. For her lost childhood. For the innocence that had been stolen from her. For all the years she had spent believing she was alone. We talked through the night. And I learned about the nightmares that still haunted her. About the hypervigilance that kept her from ever truly relaxing, about the ways she had learned to see danger in every act of kindness. I began to understand that her coldness wasn't cruelty, it was survival. Her isolation wasn't arrogance, it was protection. When we finally fell asleep together on her couch, with her head on my shoulder and my arms around her, I felt something click into place inside me. This was what I had been searching for without knowing it. Not just someone to care for, but someone who could teach me about resilience, about the way love could grow in the most unlikely places. I woke up to the sound of her screaming, her body rigid with terror as she fought against demons that existed only in her dreams. I held her and whispered that she was safe, that I was there, that the nightmare was over. When she finally stopped shaking, she looked at me with such gratitude and wonder that I felt my heart expand to accommodate new depths of feeling. After that night, everything between us changed. I began visiting Ria regularly, bringing cookies and conversation, watching as she slowly learned to trust, not just me, but the possibility of connection itself. I saw her smile for the first time. A real smile that transformed her entire face. And I felt like I had been given a gift more precious than anything I had ever received. I loved watching her paint. There was something magical about the way she would lose herself in the colors and textures, the way her entire body would relax as she worked. She would talk to me while she painted, sharing stories about Mrs. Green, about the techniques she had learned, about the way art had saved her life by giving her a way to express feelings that were too big for words. Her paintings were extraordinary, full of emotion and life, each one telling a story about survival and hope. I asked her once if she had ever considered showing them to anyone, and she looked at me as if I had suggested she walk naked through the town square. The idea of sharing her art with the world was terrifying to her. But I could see the longing in her eyes, the part of her that wanted to be seen and understood. I began to understand that trust, for Ria, was not something that could be given all at once. It had to be built slowly, one small moment at a time. She would test me constantly, pushing against my boundaries to see if I would stay or leave. offering me pieces of her story to see if I would judge her or accept her. I learned to read the subtle signs of her emotional state, the way she would hold her shoulders when she was feeling overwhelmed, the slight tremor in her hands when she was remembering something painful, the way she would look toward the window when she was thinking about running away. I learned to be present without being invasive, to offer support without being pushy, to love her without trying to fix her. The day I saw her painting with colors splashed across her face and clothes was a revelation. She had been so absorbed in her work that she had forgotten to be self-conscious, forgotten to maintain the careful distance she usually kept between herself and the world. When she opened the door to me like that, messy and beautiful and completely unself-conscious, I felt like I was seeing the real Rhea for the first time. She was luminous in that moment, her eyes bright with creative energy, her movements flowing and natural. I watched her work, seeing the way she would step back to examine her canvas, the way she would tilt her head as she considered her next stroke, the way she would sometimes close her eyes and simply feel the paint between her fingers. That was when I knew I was falling in love with her. The realization hit me like a wave, sudden and overwhelming. This wasn't just about helping someone heal anymore. It wasn't just about my tendency to care for wounded souls. This was about the way she made me feel when she smiled, about the way my heart raced when she trusted me with another piece of her story, about the way I had come to think of her happiness as essential to my own. I wanted to tell her, but I was afraid of frightening her away. Love was such a dangerous concept for someone who had been hurt so deeply, and I didn't want to add pressure to a connection that was still so fragile. So I kept my feelings to myself, content to be whatever she needed me to be. But when she set down her paintbrush and turned to me, when she moved closer and closer until there was no space left between us, I knew that she was feeling something too. The way she looked at me with such intensity and vulnerability made me forget how to breathe. When Rhea kissed me, it was like the sun breaking through clouds after a long winter. Her lips were soft and warm, and I could taste tears on them, tears of relief, of gratitude, of finally allowing herself to feel something beautiful. The kiss was tentative at first, as if she was afraid I might pull away. But when I responded with all the love I had been carrying for her, she melted against me with a sigh that sounded like coming home. She thanked me for saving her, but I wanted to tell her that she had saved me too. Before I met her, I had been drifting through life, caring for others, but never allowing myself to be truly vulnerable with anyone. She had taught me that real love meant accepting someone completely. Not just their light, but their darkness. Not just their strength, but their fragility. The words she spoke to me in that moment were the most beautiful I had ever heard. She told me that she had known from the first day we met that there was something special between us, that she felt my care and concern even when she was fighting against it. She told me that I was the first person since Mrs. Green who had seen her as someone worth saving. When she confessed her love for me, her voice breaking with emotion, I felt like my heart might burst from the joy of it. This woman who had learned to expect pain from every human connection was choosing to love me, was choosing to trust me with her heart despite everything she had been through. I held her close and promised her that I would never leave, that she would never have to face her demons alone again. I told her that I had been looking for her my entire life without knowing it, that every act of kindness I had ever offered to anyone else had been practiced for loving her. The way she cried then was different from all the other times I had seen her tears. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of finally allowing herself to believe that she deserved love. I cried with her, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we had found together. When we moved to her bedroom, It was with the reverence of two people who understood how precious and fragile love could be. Every touch was a promise. Every kiss was a prayer. I had never experienced intimacy like that before. Not just physical, but emotional. Not just passionate, but healing. She was so beautiful in her vulnerability. So brave in her willingness to share herself completely with me. I watched her face as we made love, seeing the way she would close her eyes and surrender to the feelings, the way she would open them and look at me with such trust and love that I felt humbled by it. Afterward, as we lay tangled together in her sheets, she told me that this was the first time she had ever made love with someone who truly cared about her well-being. The first time she had been touched with gentleness instead of violence. The first time she had felt safe enough to let herself experience pleasure without fear. I understood then that what we had shared was more than just physical intimacy. It was a reclamation of her body, a healing of wounds that had been festering for years. I felt honored to be the person she had chosen to share that journey with. In the weeks that followed, I watched Rhea transform before my eyes. It wasn't a dramatic change. Trauma doesn't heal overnight, but a gradual softening, a slow unfurling of the person she had always been beneath the protective walls she had built. She started sleeping better, the nightmares becoming less frequent. She would still wake sometimes, gasping and afraid. But now she had someone to hold her, someone to remind her that she was safe. I learned to recognize the signs of an approaching episode and how to help her through them without making her feel fragile or broken. She began to eat more, her body slowly remembering what it felt like to be nourished and cared for. I would cook for her, simple meals that we would share while she told me about her day, or her memories, or her dreams for the future. Watching her rediscover the pleasure of food, of being cared for in such a basic way, was profoundly moving. Most importantly, she began to trust her own worthiness of love. She would still sometimes look at me with surprise, as if she couldn't quite believe I was really there. But the fear was gradually being replaced by wonder. She would reach for my hand without thinking, would curl up against me while we watched movies, would call me just to hear my voice. I was changing too, becoming more confident in my ability to love and be loved. Rhea's healing was teaching me things about myself that I had never known, that I was stronger than I had believed, that I had depths of patience and compassion I had never been called upon to use. That I could love someone not in spite of their scars, but because of the strength those scars represented. We developed routines together, small rituals that grounded us both. I would bring her cookies every weekend, and she would share her latest paintings with me. We would take walks in her neighborhood, her gradually becoming more comfortable with being seen in public with me. We would spend evenings reading to each other, her voice growing stronger and more confident as she shared her favorite passages. She started talking about the future for the first time, making plans that extended beyond just surviving the next day. She wanted to finish school, maybe apply to art programs, possibly even show her work someday. The fact that she was thinking about tomorrow, about next year, about all the possibilities ahead of her, felt like a miracle to me. I helped her hang new paintings in her house, adding brightness and life to spaces that had felt cold and empty. We rearranged furniture, bought fresh flowers, opened curtains that had been closed for years. The house began to feel like a home instead of just a place to hide. But perhaps the most significant change was in the way she related to other people. She started making eye contact in her classes, started participating in discussions, started allowing herself to be seen as the intelligent, thoughtful person she had always been. She even made a few tentative friendships, people who appreciated her quiet wisdom and artistic talent. Watching her rediscover her place in the world was like watching a flower bloom in time-lapse photography. Every day brought new growth, new confidence, new reasons to hope. There were still difficult days, times when the weight of her past would crash down on her like a wave. I learned to recognize the signs, the way she would withdraw into herself, the way her paintings would become darker and more turbulent, the way she would sometimes look at me as if she expected me to disappear. During these episodes, I would remind her that healing wasn't linear, that setbacks didn't mean failure, that love didn't disappear just because someone was having a bad day. I would hold her when she needed to be held, give her space when she needed to be alone, and always remind her that she wasn't going through it by herself anymore. One particularly difficult night, she told me about the guilt she still carried about her father's death. Even though she knew intellectually that she had been defending herself, that she had been a child with no other options, the emotional weight of having taken a life still haunted her. She worried that she was fundamentally damaged, that the violence she had been capable of made her unworthy of love. I listened to her fears without trying to minimize them or explain them away. Instead, I told her that I saw her actions as the ultimate act of self-preservation, that the 12-year-old girl who had found the courage to save herself was a hero, not a villain. I told her that her capacity for violence in the face of abuse didn't make her dangerous. It made her a survivor. She cried in my arms that night, grieving not just for her lost innocence, but for the father she had needed him to be, for the childhood that had been stolen from her, for all the years she had spent believing she was irredeemably broken. I held her through all, whispering words of love and reassurance, helping her carry the weight of her pain until she was strong enough to bear it herself. There were also moments of incredible joy, times when her laughter would ring through the house like music, when she would dance while cooking dinner, when she would surprise me with small gestures of affection that took my breath away. These moments of lightness felt precious and hard-won, and I treasured each one. She started talking about wanting to help other survivors, about using her art to tell stories of resilience and hope. She began volunteering at a local shelter, offering art therapy sessions to children who had experienced trauma. Watching her transform her pain into purpose, her wounds into wisdom, was profoundly inspiring. I saw her recognize herself in the faces of the children she worked with, saw her offer them the kind of understanding and acceptance that she had never received as a child. She was giving them what Mrs. Green had given her, proof that they were worthy of love, that their survival mattered, that they could create beauty from their brokenness. As our relationship deepened, we began to navigate the complexities of building a life together. Ria had never learned how to be in a healthy relationship, had never seen what love could look like when it wasn't twisted by power and control. She was learning to communicate her needs, to set boundaries, to trust that conflict could be resolved without violence or abandonment. I was learning, too, how to love someone who had been deeply wounded, how to be patient with triggers I didn't understand, how to celebrate small victories and weather inevitable setbacks. I was discovering that real love wasn't just about grand gestures and passionate moments. It was about showing up consistently, about choosing each other again and again, especially when it was difficult. We had our first real argument about 6 months into our relationship, when I suggested she might benefit from therapy. She interpreted my suggestion as criticism, as evidence that I thought she was too damaged to love. The fight escalated quickly, with her retreating into old patterns of pushing me away, and me struggling to understand how to reach her. But this time, instead of giving up, we worked through it. We talked about our fears, about the ways our pasts had shaped our responses to conflict, about what we needed from each other to feel safe and loved. It was messy and difficult and sometimes painful, but it was also healing. We were learning to fight for our relationship instead of against each other. Rhea started therapy soon after that, working with a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery. It was hard work, bringing her buried pain into the light, but I watched her grow stronger and more confident with each session. She began to understand that her reactions weren't crazy or wrong. They were normal responses to abnormal experiences. I started therapy too, wanting to better understand how to support her and how to process my own emotions about loving someone who had been through so much. I learned about secondary trauma, about the ways that caring for someone who had been hurt could affect me, about the importance of taking care of myself so I could be present for her. We celebrated our first anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, surrounded by Rhea's paintings and the comfortable routines we had built together. She gave me a portrait she had painted of us, and I gave her a key to my apartment, a symbol of my commitment to building a future together. That night, as we made love with the tenderness and passion that had only grown deeper over time, I realized that I had never imagined love could be like this. Not just the dramatic, all-consuming passion of movies and novels, but something more sustaining. A love that could weather storms, that could grow stronger through challenges, that could heal old wounds while creating new joys. Now, 2 years later, I watch Rhea preparing for her first solo art exhibition, and I'm filled with pride and amazement at how far she's come. The woman who once couldn't imagine sharing her art with anyone is now ready to open her heart to the world through her paintings. Her work has evolved along with her healing, becoming more vibrant and hopeful while still maintaining the depth and emotional honesty that makes it so powerful. She's planning to donate a portion of the proceeds to the shelter where she volunteers, completing the circle of healing that began with Mrs. Green's kindness all those years ago. She still has difficult days, times when the weight of her past feels overwhelming, but now she has tools to cope, people who love her, and most importantly, a deep understanding of her own strength and resilience. She knows that she's not broken. She's beautifully human, with scars that tell a story of survival and love that has been hard-won. We've talked about marriage, about children, about the kind of life we want to build together. These conversations once would have terrified her, but now they fill her with hope. She wants to create the kind of family she never had, to give children the love and safety that was denied to her. I can picture her as a mother, fierce and protective and gentle, teaching her children that they are worthy of love simply because they exist. I think about Mrs. Green often, about how she would feel seeing Rhea now. I believe she would be proud of the woman Rhea has become, of the way she has taken the love she was given and multiplied it, spreading it to others who need healing. Mrs. Green planted seeds of hope in Rhea's heart, and now those seeds have grown into a garden that nourishes everyone who enters it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't persisted in trying to reach her, if I had given up after those first rejections. The thought fills me with a kind of existential terror because I can't imagine my life without her. She has taught me what it means to love completely, to see someone's pain and choose to walk beside them through it, to believe in someone's capacity for healing even when they can't believe in it themselves. Our love story isn't a fairy tale. It's messier than that, more complicated, more real. It's about two imperfect people choosing each other every day. About love that doesn't magically fix everything but makes the broken places beautiful. It's about learning that sometimes the people who are hardest to love are the ones who need it most, and that the act of loving them changes us in ways we never expected. Today is the day of Ria's art exhibition, and I'm standing in the gallery watching her talk to visitors about her work. She's wearing a blue dress that brings out the color of her eyes, and her hair is pulled back in a way that shows off the confidence in her posture. She looks radiant, transformed, absolutely beautiful. A young woman approaches one of Ria's paintings, a piece called Breaking Through, that shows a figure emerging from darkness into light. The woman stares at it for a long time, and I can see tears in her eyes. She asks Ria about the inspiration for the piece, and Ria's response is gentle and honest. She talks about surviving trauma, about the long journey from brokenness to wholeness, about the way art can help us process pain and transform it into something meaningful. The young woman nods, understanding passing between them, and I realize that this is what Mrs. Green always knew, that Ria's story could be a beacon of hope for others walking similar paths. Later, as we're cleaning up after the successful opening, Ria takes my hand and leads me to a painting I haven't seen before. It's a portrait of two women, one with dark hair and one with light, standing together against a backdrop of melting ice. The title card reads, "Where the Ice Melts, a Love Story." She painted us, but more than that, she painted the moment when her walls came down, when she allowed herself to be loved and to love in return. The ice in the painting isn't disappearing, it's transforming, becoming water that nourishes new growth, that creates possibilities for life. As I look at the painting, I remember that first day when I saw her sitting alone in class, surrounded by invisible walls of ice. I remember the patience it took to wait for those walls to melt, the faith required to believe that love could triumph over fear. I remember the moment when she first kissed me, when all that ice finally began to flow. We drive home together through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, past the house where she once lived in isolation, past the places where she learned to survive. But now we're heading toward our shared apartment, toward the life we've built together, toward a future that stretches out before us full of possibility. Before we go to sleep, Ria checks her phone and gasps. 3 people have already contacted the gallery about purchasing pieces from her show, and 2 others have inquired about commissioning work. But more importantly, she's received messages from several young women who saw her art and felt less alone in their own struggles. That night, as we lay in bed together, Ria turns to me with eyes full of wonder and gratitude. She tells me that she never imagined her life could be like this, full of love and purpose and hope. She thanks me again for not giving up on her, for seeing something worth saving even when she couldn't see herself. But I want her to understand that the saving was mutual. She saved me too, in ways I'm still discovering. She taught me that love isn't just about the easy moments. It's about choosing to stay when things get difficult, about believing in someone's capacity for growth, even when they can't believe in it themselves, about the way 2 broken people can heal each other if they're brave enough to try. She taught me that everyone has a story, that the people who seem the most unlovable are often the ones who need love the most desperately. She taught me that patience can be a form of love, that persistence can be a prayer, that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is simply refusing to give up on them. As I listen to her breathing slow and deepen beside me, I think about all the nights she spent alone, all the tears she cried in darkness, all the years she believed she was unworthy of love. Now she sleeps peacefully in my arms, secure in the knowledge that she is cherished, that her story matters, that her healing has become a source of hope for others. The girl who once was trapped behind walls of ice has become a woman who creates beauty from brokenness, who transforms pain into purpose, who loves with the fierce intensity of someone who knows how precious and fragile love can be. She has become exactly who Mrs. Green always knew she could be. Not in spite of her scars, but because of them. And I have become someone I never knew I could be too. I have learned to love without trying to fix, to support without suffocating, to believe in healing even when it's slow and imperfect. I have learned that the deepest love comes not from finding someone who has never been broken, but from choosing to love someone whose broken places have made them more beautiful, not less. Our love story continues to unfold, day by day, choice by choice. We're planning a wedding for next spring, a simple ceremony in the garden behind Mrs. Green's old house, which Rhea has turned into a studio space where she teaches art to trauma survivors. We want to exchange vows in the place where Rhea first learned what love could look like, surrounded by the paintings that have become her way of giving back to the world. We're also talking about starting a foundation that would provide art therapy to children who have experienced abuse, using Rhea's story and her art to fund healing for others. It feels like the perfect way to honor Mrs. Green's legacy, to ensure that the love she planted in Rhea's heart continues to grow and spread. Sometimes people ask me how I knew to keep trying with Rhea when everyone else had given up. The truth is, I didn't know. I just felt, somewhere deep in my heart, that she was worth fighting for. I believed that underneath all that ice was someone extraordinary. Someone who had survived things that would have destroyed most people. Someone whose capacity for love would be immeasurable once she felt safe enough to let it out. I was right about that, but I was wrong about one thing. I thought I was the one doing the saving, but it turned out we saved each other. Love, I've learned, is not a rescue mission. It's a collaboration, a choice two people make to build something beautiful together from whatever materials they have. Even if those materials include scars and fears and broken places that may never fully heal. The ice melts slowly, but it does melt. Fear gives way to trust. Isolation transforms into connection. And wounds become sources of wisdom and compassion. Where once there was only frozen wasteland, now there are flowing rivers of love and creativity and hope. This is our story, not perfect, not easy, but real and beautiful and worth telling. It's a reminder that everyone deserves love, that healing is possible, that sometimes the most broken people have the most to teach us about what it means to be truly alive. And as I fall asleep beside the woman who changed my life simply by allowing me to love her, I know that this is just the beginning. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new joys, new opportunities to choose each other, new chances to prove that love really can conquer fear if we're brave enough to let it. The ice is melted, but the water flows on, nourishing, sustaining, creating new life wherever it goes. And we flow with it, together, toward whatever beautiful future awaits us downstream.